The United States pays more for drugs than any other country.
They're profiting from what is fundamentally a broken system.
Every calculation that I made clearly demonstrated this is not anymore a regional outbreak, but the virus has already spread worldwide.
Johnson & Johnson announcing that it's going to be splitting into two publicly traded companies.
I am living, have lived, and want to continue to live best I can.
Revenue from U.S. retail pharmacies reached a record $465 billion in 2020.
The United States pays more for drugs than any other country.
Drug prices are totally irrational. Something that should cost $2 often costs $300 because of the complicated relationship between insurance companies and pharmacies and coverage.
Millions of people get their prescription drugs from pharmacies like CVS, Walgreens, and Rite Aid.
I like to describe it as is the pharmacist really being the most accessible healthcare professional. It's the last provider that most patients see before going home.
Those in the industry say maintaining a dynamic pharmaceutical delivery system helps the consumer save money.
Patients have a wide array of choices on which pharmacy they like to go to. They're likely going to go to the pharmacy that gives them the best experience and the lowest cost for their medications.
But nearly 1 in 4 Americans say it's difficult to afford their medications, according to a March 2019 poll by the Kaiser Family Foundation.
I'll do whatever it takes to help a consumer find a fair price.
They're profiting from what is fundamentally a broken system. It is fundamentally a deep problem we have.
So how did the system of delivering prescription drugs become so complicated? Why do pharmacies exist? And how can consumers best save money? The business of pharmacy throughout the 1800s was primarily selling medications, compounding drugs on site for their patients. But new technology and mass manufacturing forced them to pivot, pushing them closer to the drugstore model we know today. Pharmacists moved their laboratories and equipment to the back of the shop, leaving space to sell other items such as candy and tobacco products. This ushered in what is called the soda fountain era of pharmacies.
If you see a lot of pictures of pharmacies from the late 1800s, early 1900s, these are beautiful pharmacies. They have elaborate soda fountains, they've got marble counters. Once you get into about the 1920s, 1930s, this whole front end of the pharmacy, stuff that happened in the pharmacy which was not related to compounding, not related to dispensing, really took off and became what pharmacies did for not only the majority of their revenue and sales, but the vast majority.
When Prohibition went into effect in 1919, sale and consumption of alcohol for, quote, medicinal purposes was allowed, creating a legal loophole that many physicians and pharmacists exploited. Front-of-the-store activities were the main business for pharmacies in this era, with less than 1% of pharmacies in the 1930s making more than half of their sales in dispensing. Soda fountains also replaced the local bar as a place to socialize. Pharmacists used some of their chemistry knowledge to create fun flavorings for new soft drinks, such as root beer, Dr. Pepper, and Coca-Cola. While they could still technically prescribe medication during this time, it was considered unethical to give out drugs without a physician's recommendation. Often referred to as the lick, stick, and pour era, the 1950s saw another shift in pharmacy practices. A clear legal distinction was drawn between pharmacists' and physicians' role in dispensing medication with the passage of the Durham-Humphrey Amendments in 1951.
That is the first federal law that said this is a prescription and this is an OTC product. There was some distinction for controlled substances before that, but really before Durham-Humphrey, there was nothing legally, in most cases, that would stop a pharmacist from giving a patient something without a prescription.
Physicians, however, continued to dispense medication through the 1980s. Around that time, there was a spike in the use of third-party insurance plans for prescriptions.
Physicians, by and large, got out of dispensing the types of medications that you would get through the pharmacy, partially because the process of setting up the systems that you need to dispense and maintaining those and all the regulations that then go along with it are just so onerous that it no longer makes sense for your average physician to dispense.
This retail model for pharmacies is a lucrative business. Major drugstores such as CVS and Walgreens make the majority of their money from their pharmacy.
For retailers, the pharmacies are really a traffic driver. So if you think about CVS and Walgreens in particular, you walk through their whole store to get to the pharmacy in most cases. And that may mean that you pick up things like toothpaste or shampoo when you're going to or from the pharmacy counter. So it's not only a way to drive traffic, it's really a way to drive sales. CVS recently reported its second quarter earnings. And if you even look at its quarterly sales or its annual sales, you'll see that the pharmacy drives the most revenue of its three different categories.
CVS, which held the largest share of the prescription drug market in 2020, generated more than $72 billion in total revenue in the second quarter of 2021, with $24.7 billion of that from its retail pharmacy and long-term care businesses, and $38.3 billion from its pharmacy benefit management services, which we'll get to in a minute. Walgreens has the second largest share of the market. It generated $28.7 billion in U.S. sales during its fiscal third quarter of 2021. $21.7 billion of it was from U.S. dispensing services. In principle, the way pharmacies make money should be simple. Buy a product in bulk at a low price and then sell it at a higher price that's still a competitive rate. However, insurance negotiations make it more complex.
The reason why pharmacies overcharge is they want to charge a price that they will make money on for any given third-party payer that's going to contract with them.
Retail pharmacies set the list price of a prescription above the amount they expect to get from any insurance company. That's because an insurance company will never reimburse a pharmacy more than they will charge a cash-paying customer. So if the prescription price at the pharmacy is $20 and the insurance company pays $10, the uninsured patient would be forced to pay $20. If the pharmacy lowered their price to, let's say, $5, the insurance company would only pay them the $5, because that's what's often called the usual and customary price. So pharmacies always set a list price that is far above what they expect to get from an insurance company. People who are uninsured, don't have the benefit of insurance, end up paying the highest list undiscounted price for their prescriptions.
There are also organizations called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, that influence pricing. PBMs are hired by health insurance companies to serve as an intermediary between the insurers and other parts of the system.
An insurance company basically says, we'll bring in an intermediary whose specialty it is to be able to negotiate what type of prescription plans or drug cost or coverage would be best for the insurer. That middle person acts as the go-between.
But PBMs are controversial within the industry.
They play multiple roles in the system. So they're also in many cases operating pharmacies. And many of the pharmacies feel aggrieved because they are now competing with the entity that they're also negotiating with for payment. And they perceive that to be negative.
There should be negotiations between the PBMs and the pharmacies. The pharmacies should be able to say, look, we'll only accept this price, and the PBMs say yes or no, but it's take it or leave it.
The top three PBMs, CVS Health's Caremark, Cigna's Express Scripts, and United Health Group's OptumRx, processed about 77% of all prescription claims in 2020, according to Drug Channels Institute. All of these businesses also have a pharmacy division.
So CVS, through their Caremark branch, decides what Joe's Pharmacy or Susie's Pharmacy or Walgreens will get paid. So yeah, it's a conflict of interest. Express Scripts, their mail order group, they are one of the largest pharmacies. They also decide what retail pharmacies get paid. And isn't it interesting that a lot of times they'll try to steer patients from a retail pharmacy into their mail order pharmacy? That's not a coincidence.
When asked for comment, CVS Health told CNBC its model simplifies healthcare for customers and its PBM held clients' prescription drug cost increases to just 3% in 2020. Express Scripts PBM said its broad networks give patients a range of choices for where and how to fill their medications, saving nearly $45 billion in 2020. OptumRx declined to comment.
My name is Greg Lopes. I work with the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, that is the trade association representing America's pharmacy benefit managers. We don't think that is a conflict of interest, and we think that there is choice for patients to go to any pharmacy of their choosing. They're likely going to go to the pharmacy that gives them the best experience and the lowest cost for their medications.
You need some kind of entity to manage, to be an intermediary in this system. I think the question is, are the PBM's incentives aligned with their clients, and are they aligned with driving the lowest cost for the system and the lowest cost to the patients?
Pharmacies themselves are not heavily regulated when it comes to setting generic drug prices.
Federal regulation on actual drug prices, as long as there is no antitrust issue, have been very weak. Pharmacies have been generally left to set prices at whatever they want.
Once third-party payers such as PBMs came into the picture in the 1960s, pharmacies lost some control over pricing.
It's at that point where pharmacists, instead of setting a price and having a person walk in and agree to pay the price or not, all of a sudden you have this negotiation with a pharmacy benefit manager, and it's totally different than what the pharmacist is used to. And their margins on products starts to fall fairly steeply.
A lot of people don't know there is a prescription drug supply and payment chain, and within that chain, there are 5 or 6 actors. If you look at it really closely, PBMs are the only ones driving the cost of drugs down.
State legislators have been focusing on regulating pharmacy benefit managers rather than pharmacies themselves. 42 states have introduced at least one law aimed at regulating PBMs. The Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision in December 2020 regarding states' rights when it comes to regulating PBMs. The ruling said that the states had a right to require PBMs to reimburse pharmacies for drugs at a rate that is higher or equal to the wholesale costs the pharmacies paid for them. There's also been regulations considered at the federal level. The U.S. Senate Finance Committee convened a hearing in February 2019 to question representatives of the major PBMs about rising drug costs. In September 2019, Democratic Congressman Frank Pallone introduced the Elijah E. Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act. The House passed the bill in December of that year, but it died in the Senate. In July 2020, former President Donald Trump signed 4 executive orders that aim to lower the high cost of prescription drugs. The Biden administration agreed to push the effective date of one of the more high-profile orders to January 1st, 2023, rather than have it go into effect in 2022.
Congress tends to be sympathetic, but they have not taken much action. And as a result, drug prices keep going up.
There are ways for consumers to still save money on generic drugs, but it requires some work. A Consumer Reports Secret Shopper survey from 2018 found that there was a huge difference between the cost of 5 commonly prescribed generic drugs at different retailers. They found that prices at the independent retailers and big box stores were much lower than those at large chain pharmacies.
One of the lessons from that is to call around, go online, and find a better pricing. But the independents often will have more competitive pricing, especially for generic drugs.
There are also various store coupons and other vouchers that can bring down costs. One way is with something called a discount card. Discount cards are backed by PBMs and provide patients with a discount on the pharmacy's retail price. There are 3 primary types of discount cards: cards created by a PBM itself, cards through a retailer such as Sam's Club or Amazon, and independent brands such as GoodRx. Here's how they work. A PBM creates a network of participating pharmacies that will accept the card and then negotiate with each pharmacy to offer a discount to customers. The pharmacies agree to pay an administrative fee to the PBM when the card is used. The discount card vendors, such as GoodRx, form agreements with the PBMs to receive a portion of that fee.
We work actually with every major PBM, and we work with pretty much every major pharmacy as well, to kind of play that role of an intermediary and ultimately give the consumer the best option for them, which again, may often not be their insurance.
GoodRx collected more than $488 million in fees from its discount card programs in 2020.
GoodRx has just taken the discount card model and found a way to scale it in a way that no one else has scaled, both in terms of marketing to consumers and in terms of accessing the network rates of multiple PBMs at the same time. One of the reasons GoodRx has grown so quickly is that it gives the uninsured people or people who have maybe insurance that isn't as good for them an opportunity to get access to some network or discounted rates operated by pharmacy benefit managers and insurance companies.
Because GoodRx is a marketplace and we get billions of prices into our system, we can often find better prices by not using necessarily the insurance that you have, but by finding a better price by simply looking at all these other different ways that consumers can save.
Most of the people using discount cards actually have some kind of health insurance plan, but when a discount card is used, the customer is bypassing their health insurance to use a PBM's insurance network instead.
The fact that we have so many people bypassing their insurance and using another insurance plan shows there's a problem in how generic drugs are priced to the consumers who have insurance, even Medicare or commercial insurance.
If pharmacies receive less money from the customer for a medication and also have to pay a fee to the PBMs, how do they benefit from discount cards?
What the discount card vendors will tell you or tell the pharmacies is, well, if it wasn't for this card, there would be $0 of revenue. The patient wouldn't fill the prescription because the price is too high. By using the discount card, the patient could fill that prescription.
I'll do whatever it takes to help a consumer find a fair price, not just for prescriptions, but for care as well. Seeing a doctor, etc. It's broken. And so we can try and point fingers at manufacturers or PBMs or anyone, The reality is they're doing what our system designed. And if we don't like it, we should come up with a better way. But until then, GoodRx is going to be focused on helping consumers navigate this crazy system, navigate all these complicated terms that people don't understand, just to simply use the same market forces that they use in every other way that they purchase something in healthcare.
I have mixed feelings about GoodRx. I applaud them for what they've done. I applaud the value they bring to consumers. On the other hand, they're profiting from what is fundamentally a broken system. They can't change the system, so I understand that, but it is fundamentally a deep problem we have.
Pharmacies serve a vital role in the healthcare system. A study from July 2020 found that people on Medicare visit their pharmacist more than their physician.
What I like to describe it as is the pharmacist really being the point of contact in the medical home. It's the most accessible healthcare professional. It's the last provider that most patients see before going home. So demand and expectations tend to be high when it comes to the delivery of pharmacy services. A physician is trained to diagnose, to take care of the patient in that way. A pharmacist is indeed the drug professional. We know the ins and outs of drugs in various specialties. And it's very difficult sometimes for a single person to understand all of the disease states, all of the medications, all of the nuances, all of the insurance information, all of the PBM information regarding managing that patient. The two can't really exist without each other.
It was January 24th, 2020, when BioNTech CEO Uğur Şahin knew that COVID-19 was likely to become a global pandemic.
I did some calculations and calculated how many people were infected, how many weeks, how many people could have traveled, how many people could be asymptomatic, and every calculation that I made clearly demonstrated this is not anymore a regional outbreak, but the virus has already spread worldwide.
Though it was over a month and a half before the World Health Organization officially declared a pandemic, Şahin met with his wife, BioNTech's co-founder and chief medical officer Özlem Türeci, and together they agreed to redirect most of the company's resources to developing a vaccine.
It was immediately clear to both of us that the technology we had, which we had already clinically developed, could help to ensure a rapid response.
Up until that point, BioNTech was primarily focused on developing novel cancer treatments. The company was little known internationally and had never brought a product to market.
They were still a small, relatively unknown biotech company, really working on this cutting-edge science.
The founders were confident in the potential of their mRNA technology, which they knew could trigger a powerful immune response. That confidence wasn't necessarily shared by the broader medical community. No mRNA vaccine or treatment had ever been approved before, but the couple's timely breakthrough was actually decades in the making.
We understood that we would need to invest some time and it would need innovations on different levels in order to make it really work for vaccines and beyond, but the potential was already clear there.
Şahin and Türeci, whose families both immigrated to Germany from Turkey, met in the early 1990s when they were working in the cancer ward at a hospital in southwest Germany. Neither envisioned a career in business.
During my time at the medical faculty studying medicine, I also started to do my PhD, which meant work in a laboratory, and that actually caused a clash in my perception.
Türeci and Şahin both realized that while there was little they could offer terminal cancer patients in the ward, in the lab they saw lots of potential for new treatments.
I was doing my lab work and understood that the immune system could be a powerful weapon to fight cancer. And at a certain time point, I realized that it's not only laboratory work, but you have really to develop the therapies, and you need funding for that.
Out of desperation, I became an entrepreneur and founded companies because I understood that if you want to use innovative research to develop medicines, you have to do it yourself.
The couple had been studying messenger RNA, or mRNA, since the late 1990s. The function of mRNA is essentially to teach our cells how to make specific proteins. But because mRNA is very unstable and quickly degrades in the body, they knew there was still a long way to go before it was ready for use in a vaccine.
At that time point, mRNA was used by a very small community. So it was like a talent. You see a young talent, you know all the weaknesses, and you know that you have to invest a lot of years to make this technology mature.
So in the meantime, they co-founded their first company, Ganymed Pharmaceuticals, in 2001. Ganymed used a more established technology, monoclonal antibodies, to treat stomach cancer. And the couple sold the company for $1.4 billion in 2016. It was Germany's biggest biotech deal ever. By that point, Shahi and Tereshi were already 8 years into their second venture, BioNTech. When they founded the company in 2008, the couple felt that they had improved the stability of mRNA enough to focus on developing individualized cancer vaccines.
The biggest challenge in cancer treatment is that every cancer is different. The personalized or individualized cancer vaccines are based on getting the tumor of the patient and analyzing that tumor, then making a vaccine which is tailored to the profile, to the genetic profile of the patient's tumor.
Unlike traditional vaccines, mRNA vaccines don't introduce a weakened version of the virus into your body. Instead, the mRNA instructs the body to make a specific virus protein that will trigger an immune response and produce antibodies, which can be used to fight off a cancer that's already growing or to protect against future COVID-19 infections. And while traditional vaccines require scientists to collect and grow large quantities of a virus, a process that can take months, mRNA vaccines are much faster to produce. That's because they're made from a DNA template in the lab, the sequence for which can be shared electronically in an instant.
It's the most ancient information technology, which means that the organism is prepared and has all the tools to understand what you want to convey in terms of messages with mRNA.
The vision and the scientific know-how were in place, but by the beginning of 2020, BioNTech had still not gotten any of its mRNA cancer vaccines approved for use in humans. The company had never turned a profit, and when it IPO'd in 2019, it raised about $100 million less than it had hoped for.
They were still a small, relatively unknown biotech company, really working on this cutting-edge science.
But the world was on the verge of changing. On the day when Shahi realized that COVID-19 had already spread around the world, few others were concerned. Europe had just reported its first few coronavirus cases, and Germany had not reported any yet. But after Shahi and Tereshi talked that morning in late January, they immediately jumped into action.
On the weekend, we started to design the vaccine sequences, and on Monday, we met our teams, explained them this could become a global outbreak and that we have the obligation to do the best what we can do to come up with vaccine candidates. And already on Tuesday, we had the full commitment of the whole team to start the development of a new vaccine.
Like in a military operation, the teams were redirected. We never put our cancer programs at hold, so they went on while those parts of the company who could really help with the COVID-19 project started step by step to pick up pace and work on Project Lightspeed.
BioNTech knew that to successfully produce, test, and manufacture a COVID vaccine on a global scale, it would need a bigger partner. The company had already partnered with Pfizer, having worked with them since 2018 to develop an mRNA-based flu vaccine, which is currently in clinical trials. And so naturally, BioNTech turned to them.
We approached Pfizer in early February, which was very early because no one really believed that there was a pandemic, and as everyone else, our Pfizer colleagues did not really believe that a pandemic vaccine would be needed.
And the response at that point from Pfizer was no. And I talked with Pfizer's CEO about this, and he was saying essentially at that point early on, he was really focused on Pfizer's operations in China, Pfizer's people in China, and he wasn't yet thinking about developing a vaccine.
Undeterred, BioNTech initially went at it alone, developing not just one, but 4 vaccine candidates. The company started preparing for phase 1 clinical trials in Germany, which would test the vaccine in humans. By this time, others were starting to catch on.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The Dow is now down more than 1,100 points as moments ago the WHO has formally declared the coronavirus a global pandemic.
And now the extreme new measures in the U.S. Large events banned in Washington state and San Francisco as U.S. cases rise over 1,000.
Less than a week after the pandemic was declared, Pfizer agreed to work with BioNTech to help them scale up their clinical trials, production, and distribution.
We had our first patient in on April 23rd. It was the first volunteer, and in July we started phase 3 clinical trial. This was already in partnership with Pfizer, which allowed us to move fast from the early stage of clinical development to the later stage of development.
So as they were starting phase 1, they were designing and figuring out phase 2. As they were getting into phase 2, they were figuring out these massive phase 3 clinical trials that they managed to start in the summer. And the FDA and regulators globally were working on being incredibly flexible.
Over 43,000 participants were enrolled in the company's phase 3 trials, which measured how many vaccinated participants contracted COVID compared to the unvaccinated placebo group. Shahi and Tereshi were by no means certain that the vaccine would work at all.
We knew that the vaccine is able to activate the immune system, but we didn't know whether the immune system is able to control the virus. So as a scientist, my expectation was it would be great if we have 70% efficacy. But I was also aware that if the immune system is not able to control, we might have just a negative result. And getting the call on Sunday evening and hearing that we have 95% efficacy, this was extraordinary. Of course, much higher than we had expected.
And it brought this just amazing hope that we would be able to start fighting back against this virus. And I think everybody who got that news felt like their lives changed.
Over 1.75 billion doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine have been delivered worldwide. And perhaps obviously, BioNTech is finally making money. With a market cap of nearly $60 billion, the company made over $4.5 billion in profit in the first 2 quarters of 2021, as the United States and European Commission governments have entered into massive contracts to buy hundreds of millions of doses. And BioNTech's stock has seen a rise of over 500% since January of 2020.
In the second quarter alone, they brought in more than 5 billion euros in revenue. That compares to just about 40 million that they took in the second quarter of last year. So this has been a transformative year for BioNTech.
In August, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine became the first to gain full FDA approval, helping pave the way for a return to normal life. But there's still a long way to go. Over half of the world remains unvaccinated, and the virus is mutating into new, more infectious variants like the Delta strain, which is ripping through communities worldwide.
Our work on COVID is still a large part of our activities here in the company, obviously, because there is still a long path to go until we have manufactured sufficient supply to ensure that all those who want to be vaccinated and need to be vaccinated get the vaccine.
In September, Pfizer submitted data to the FDA demonstrating that a booster given 6 months after the second shot restores immunity to 95%. Currently, the FDA has authorized boosters of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for certain vulnerable populations, such as those over 65.
My personal opinion is that we can't control the pandemic and we can't control this virus if we don't enable that the vast majority of the population stays immune.
And then there's the issue of kids. Currently, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is the only one authorized by the FDA for use in children 12 and over, though the 2 companies have requested emergency authorization for ages 5 through 11 after clinical trials showed positive results when kids were given 1/3 of the normal dosage. But amidst their ongoing COVID efforts, BioNTech has still found the time to advance its oncology work.
Even during the pandemic, we have been able to initiate multiple phase 1 clinical trials, which meant bringing new concepts, not only mRNA vaccines, but also other immune therapies for the first time in human testing in cancer patients. And we have also initiated advanced trials with our cancer vaccines, where we compare against standard of care treatments.
We are of course excited to get the data, and it could be as exciting as COVID-19 efficacy data.
Shahi and Tereshi emphasize that developing therapeutic cancer vaccines, which are administered after a patient has already been diagnosed, are bound to be a much lengthier process than developing the COVID vaccine. That's because of the time it takes to recruit cancer patients for clinical trials and monitor their condition over a number of years. Still, though, they say there's much to be learned from the rapid response to the coronavirus pandemic.
Namely, that it's important also on the regulator side to have sufficient resources in order to enable very efficient work on dossiers for clinical trial approvals or for drug approvals. There are processes which could be much leaner and much faster.
The question is, can we use that model also for other severe diseases? And I believe we have to consider how to use it. Because if you take, for example, cancer, in the time between 2020, beginning 2020 and now, more patients die with cancer than patients die by COVID-19. So it is not a pandemic, but it's an endemic.
Shahi and Tereshi are modest about their success. They ride their bikes to work and don't own a car or TV. And while their company has grown from about 1,300 employees at the beginning of 2020 to around 2,500 today, it's still minuscule compared to the likes of Pfizer, which employs about 78,000 people worldwide. But what the influx of money and attention will change is the level to which BioNTech can invest in and accelerate its other endeavors.
We have now the chance to invest, to accelerate our cancer immunotherapies. We have the chance to make it bolder. We have the chance to go in other fields.
It's also very valuable to acquire technologies or assets which we otherwise would need to develop ourselves, which means saving time and being faster to bring medicines to patients.
In July, BioNTech acquired Kite Pharma's cell therapy platform, as well as its Maryland-based manufacturing facility. Kite is also focused on developing cancer immunotherapy products. And Shahi said in a statement that the acquisition will accelerate BioNTech's development of novel cell therapies in the US. And the company is expanding beyond the oncology space too.
In the next years, we will certainly see that we will enter into clinical development for infectious disease vaccines like malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, continue to work in the cancer field, start projects in the autoimmune field, start projects for treatment of inflammatory diseases, and have also projects in the field of regenerative medicine.
Since the pandemic began, companies developing mRNA technologies have raised billions of dollars combined. And according to Roots Analysis, an India-based biopharma research firm, there are over 150 mRNA-based vaccines and therapies in development.
The COVID-19 pandemic provided this incredible proof of concept for messenger RNA. It showed it really works as a vaccine against this coronavirus. Now the question is, will this really work as a vaccine against flu? Will this really work as a drug for cancer? Those questions are not yet answered.
For their part, Shahi and Tereshi say the COVID vaccine is just the beginning.
I believe that mRNA as a technology will be transformative for the biopharma space. mRNA can be used not only for vaccines, for all sorts of pharmaceuticals. And here at BioNTech, we are actually already doing it.
I expect that in about 15 years, about 30% of new products developed will be based on mRNA therapies. And that would not only include products which are copying existing products or replacing them, but really completely new type of medicines which are made possible only because this technology is now available. And this is, of course, exciting to become part of this future and to drive the development of new medicines with this type of technology.
Johnson & Johnson is the biggest pharmaceutical company in the U.S. based on its market cap. It was named number 36 on the 2021 Fortune 500 list of the largest United States corporations by total revenue. Johnson & Johnson has experienced dividend growth for nearly 60 years and has consistently outperformed the S&P 500 over the past 25 years.
The analyst community has been talking about splitting up J&J for years, as long as I've known the company.
Johnson & Johnson announcing that it is going to be splitting into two publicly traded companies.
The Pharma and a medical device company, which will be called Johnson & Johnson, and then the Tylenol, Listerine, Band-Aid company.
They're now separating the consumer business away from pharmaceutical and the medical device division, and I think that's going to create significant shareholder value.
But some investors question why J&J would choose to break up now. The company is embroiled in a series of lawsuits regarding its talcum powder as well as its role in the opioid crisis. J&J also took a hit when the CDC recommended Americans receive one of the mRNA COVID vaccines from either Pfizer or Moderna rather than J&J's due to, quote, the risk of serious adverse events.
The timing situation is critical just because people have been very intrigued as to why now.
Johnson & Johnson is one of the most influential companies in the pharmaceutical industry. It's really seen as a bellwether for the space.
Why is the largest pharmaceutical company in the U.S. breaking itself up, and what does it mean for investors? Johnson & Johnson is made up of three unique business segments: consumer, medical devices, which is also called medtech, and pharmaceuticals. The consumer business sells everything from Tylenol to Neutrogena. The pharmaceutical and medical device side of the company develops vaccines, like its single-dose COVID vaccine, cancer treatments, joint replacement materials, and other biomedical technology.
Separation right now makes a lot of sense. You're going to have two companies with good financial strength and cash flows in order to pursue the objectives that they need to have durable growth for the foreseeable future.
Analysts say the split allows J&J to bring in a management team to specifically focus on the consumer division while also giving that segment new branding and marketing.
The strategy of running these consumer businesses is very, very dissimilar to a medical device or a pharmaceutical business. There's a lot more direct to consumer, obviously. The sales and marketing effort, the social media effort is very pronounced in consumer. It's much less so for the other businesses. So allowing a management team just to focus on what has to be done in order to resume growth or drive better revenue growth over the next couple of years, I think is very smart on their part.
Our pharma and our medical device business tends to be much more of a business-to-business relationship in the way that we work through other intermediaries, compared to the consumer business. And most importantly, where we see things going into the future, we feel that now is the right time to make this kind of a move. And again, ultimately, it's going to allow us to reach more patients, more consumers, have more innovation, and execute in a much more focused way.
It's a somewhat common practice for companies with diverse segments to break apart. Pfizer, Eli Lilly, and Merck all reorganized their business structures within the last 5 years by spinning off segments into separate companies.
So what the market is saying is that companies should focus on their core competencies and let us diversify. We've already seen several examples of large pharma separating out non-core assets.
I think they finally came to terms with the fact that they weren't really seeing value in the share price from having that consumer business.
When you're a conglomerate, you never get credit for the various different pieces. And quite frankly, you probably shouldn't, because some of the parts of the company they're not investing the way they should. They're not focused the way they should. And so when you separate out various different businesses, we now, as analysts and portfolio managers, can appreciate what each of the businesses are. And they do over time. There have been studies that have been done, both RemainCo and NewCo can outperform because they are on their own.
So far, investors' reaction to the divide has been mild, with the stock only moving modestly higher on the news. The stock went on to underperform the week following the announcement.
The market hasn't really reacted to the news. There are some risks to this execution from separating out the consumer business. And I think investors aren't fully convinced yet of the standalone earnings potential of both companies. So from a consumer perspective, I think people wonder how the consumer business can compete with companies such as Procter & Gamble and some of these larger, more established players in the space.
J&J's business move may also help attract a different type of investor.
You're going to get people that are consumer staples and consumer oriented. You'll get them focused on the consumer piece. And of course, you're now more of a pure play healthcare. And so you'll get more healthcare analysts.
You finally get a situation at J&J where the balance of the business is not impacted by what's going on, good or bad, with the consumer business. But unfortunately, there's been more bad than good for J&J over the past, call it 5 to 10 years, probably.
Johnson & Johnson coming out with a statement saying that due to a product review resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, they have decided to cut about 100 different products from their assessment, including all of their talc-based Johnson's Baby products.
Let's not forget that the talc litigation is with consumer product, right? And the talc litigation has been horrendous.
Johnson & Johnson has experienced a number of legal battles and liability issues regarding all three segments of its business. In July 2021, Johnson & Johnson reached a settlement that requires the company to pay $5 billion over the next 9 years due to its involvement in the opioid crisis. But it's the legal challenges on the consumer side of the company that has grabbed the most media attention. More than 20,000 lawsuits have been filed alleging Johnson & Johnson's baby powder resulted in mesothelioma and ovarian cancer. These legal challenges have been ongoing for years, with a slew of headlines coming out about juries awarding plaintiffs millions of dollars. Johnson & Johnson discontinued selling its talc-based baby powder in the US and Canada in May 2020 as demand for the product fell. In June 2020, the courts ordered J&J to pay a $2.1 billion fine in the baby powder cancer case. There may be more settlements and fines to come as the lawsuits make their way through the courts state by state.
I think one of the main reasons that this stock trades where it does, which is, a discount to the market overall, is the unknown. Once we get the resolution, I honestly think it's going to be kind of almost liberating. Okay, we got it. We figured it out. Whatever the dollar amount is, now we can move it along and focus again on the pharma business and the med tech business.
These may seem like big numbers, but to put it in perspective, J&J reported a profit of more than $15 billion in 2019 and $14.7 billion in 2020. The company reported $19.9 billion in free cash flow in 2019, and that number went up to $20.2 billion in 2020.
I don't think the legal issues will be an impediment to the company's growth going forward. I do think there is some headline risk to it. We often get questions as to if that's the reason J&J has separated out consumer business, and I don't think that's the case. I think they separated out the consumer business because the business model has changed, and the synergies that they used to have with pharma med device are now different.
Johnson & Johnson declined CNBC's request for comment on its decision to separate, as well as the ongoing litigation. The company told the Wall Street Journal in November 2021 that the lawsuits alleging the use of Johnson's baby powder caused cancer didn't play a role in the decision to break up the company. In October 2021, J&J put the talc claims into a separate company which filed for bankruptcy protection. That means it's going to be considered a separate entity from the consumer business.
What they're trying to do is increase the attention on what's actually happening with the business at the remaining J&J, having the liability shell absorb the pain related to talc and the painkiller situation, and then the consumer business hang on to the rest.
So it is something that we have seen other companies do before. I think that J&J will be able to prevail in basically having an efficient way to deal with all these liabilities and then remove it, I think, from the headline risk.
If they can create these liability shells in order to not protect the company so much, but just to limit the effect it's having, I don't think investors care as long as they're the company responsible for paying out any claims.
Johnson & Johnson's different segments tend to offset one another.
The risk to J&J longer term is that there are issues that are more pervasive within either pharma or med tech, and the consumer business no longer provides an offset in the event that the fundamentals around that unit improve.
When you think about the future of consumer, if that business model is evolving and the synergies that were historically there are not there anymore, and you require greater investment in order to grow that business, then I think the offset to cash flow, if there's any hiccup in pharma med device, won't be there the way that it used to be.
So they're going to obviously have to do a very good job of making sure the growth rates with the balance of the business continue to be robust or improve from here.
Wall Street has also expressed concerns about how smoothly the process of spinning off will go.
Some of the things that people have asked about that the company hasn't given a ton of color on is the stand-up costs associated with separating out this consumer business, any potential dyssynergies and the tax implications, and exactly how they're going to affect this.
There are a few other potential risks, such as the possibility of healthcare reform or patent expiration.
That's why they're so excited about their pipeline, because while a few of their drugs are going to go off patent in a few years, and that's your near-term risk, your longer-term story is, well, wait, we've got a big pipeline, and now we're kind of more of a the streamlined company where we can take our cash flows and reinvest and do even more and do even better and grow even stronger.
Some analysts were questioning why Johnson & Johnson didn't split into 3 companies by separating its pharmaceutical and medical device units.
It's a topic of debate, and it's not clear that over the longer term, if that might not be something they could pursue. But I think today, the board and the company feel that pharma and med device still has a lot of synergies. They talk about a lot of opportunities that are shared from a market perspective between the two businesses, and the way that products are developed and commercialized are still similar enough where they can actually work together to get it done. But I would say that over the longer term, that would potentially make sense. And I think one of the things when I talk to investors about J&J, what's really tough is it's hard to find an investor that has the broad enough perspective to really get their arms around all 3 businesses, being pharma, med device, and consumer. People are usually focused on one of those 3 segments.
I would say that when you have a business that where most of the analyst community doesn't really pay attention to, and you siphon that off, it's probably going to be a positive.
I think I'm going to continue to add to this position. They're trying to create shareholder value any way that they can. This is one you kind of put away. And I think just going to let it ride and let them figure out how the whole thing evolves. I think it's very exciting, though.
There are roughly 6 million people living with Alzheimer's in the US, a figure that is expected to more than double by 2050. The memory-robbing disease kills more than 120,000 Americans a year, making it the 6th leading cause of death.
Alzheimer's disease is a devastating disease of progressive dementia where people can lose various aspects of their cognitive functioning, their ability to remember key things and people.
Eugenia is not aware of the fact that she can ask me the same question 10 times in 10 minutes. I mean,
maybe 9.5.
9.5 times.
The US has spent billions on research, but still hasn't been able to develop a drug that targets the cause of the disease.
We know that it's a costly disease, and the burden of that cost continues to grow exponentially.
A drug for any company that could treat Alzheimer's successfully would be seen as just a goldmine for Wall Street and a huge gift to society.
Now, one biotech company thinks it's cracked Alzheimer's tricky code in a drug known as aducanumab, now sold as Aduhelm.
This is an approval for Biogen. This is a huge stock event.
It's a 50% pop on this FDA approval.
But Biogen has reported only a fraction of estimated sales. The company's share price has nearly halved. Major insurers haven't decided whether to cover the treatment, which Biogen originally priced at roughly $56,000 per year. But now the company is bringing that down by about 50% to hopefully boost sales. And all of this comes as the FDA itself faces investigations into its Aduhelm decision, which went against the advice of its own advisors.
There's been a real mixed reception among doctors because of the lack of completely convincing data supporting whether the drug works.
So the question is, who will be prescribing this? Who will be monitoring it? Who will have access to it? And who's going to pay for it?
The US spends roughly $3 billion on Alzheimer's and dementia research every year. That's up 360% over the past 5 years. Spending on people with Alzheimer's is set to cost Medicare $599 billion by 2050.
The fact is that Alzheimer's is not just a disease of the individual who has it. It is a burden on also individuals who are caregivers as well. In 2020, there are over 11 million Americans who are providing unpaid care for individuals with Alzheimer's. That unpaid care is costly to them and to their family.
I'm Eugenia Zuckerman, and I have Alzheimer's.
I'm Dick Novick, retired from the broadcasting business to be able to take care of my wife once I heard she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Eugenia was diagnosed 3 years ago. Every senior walks around the house with their glasses on their forehead saying, "Where are my glasses?" But this got beyond that. This got to, constantly asking the same question. A certain amount of disorientation.
My daughters were saying to me, "Mom, something is wrong with you. You're not sounding okay. Yeah, we have to take you to the hospital and get you tested." I said, "No way." But of course, I ended up being taken to the hospital and being looked at very carefully.
One of the biggest shocks to us was you go to any other specialist, a gastroenterologist, and they give you a medicine for your stomachache. With Alzheimer's, there has been really no commonly prescribed medication.
Alzheimer's is a notoriously difficult disease to treat.
There are a couple drugs available. They're, at this point, many decades old, and they can help with some of the symptoms associated with Alzheimer's disease, but in general, they don't work very well.
So there hadn't been a new Alzheimer's drug approved in almost 2 decades when Aduhelm came along, and nothing out there to try to actually affect the underlying drivers of the disease.
That's where Biogen comes in. In recent years, its portfolio of other drugs has faced growing generic competition. In 2020, the company posted $13.4 billion in revenue, a near 6.5% drop year over year. Researchers designed Aduhelm to target one of the disease's defining characteristics.
What happens in Alzheimer's disease is that there's a faulty cleavage of amyloid in a sense that it results in the production of these insoluble and sticky amyloid beta, we call them. And when this forms, what happens is that they accumulate in the brain, and around it, surrounding it, are signs of inflammation, oxidation, and brain cell death.
So Lilly has a very similar drug to Biogen's called donanemab, which it has been developing and had some really promising earlier stage results that showed not just that it clears the amyloid plaques from the brain, but also that there is an effect on cognition.
But the path to an FDA-approved Alzheimer's drug has been riddled with failures. Over 200 potential medicines failed their trials over the past decade, and in early 2019, Aduhelm almost became one of them. In early 2019, Biogen said it was giving up on Aduhelm after it didn't appear to work in 2 large trials, and researchers began to doubt that reducing amyloid would benefit Alzheimer's patients.
Nobody has shown that this is the cause of Alzheimer's disease. And certainly it hasn't been shown to be the only cause of Alzheimer's disease, because there are also other abnormal proteins that accumulate in the Alzheimer's brain.
There have been a lot of drugs that have been developed for Alzheimer's disease, and dozens of drugs like aducanumab have targeted amyloid plaque. None of those drugs have shown any real benefit.
But 8 months later, Biogen made a surprising reversal. The company claimed a new analysis of one of those trials showed Aduhelm actually improved cognitive function for patients on a high dose. Even though the other trial didn't find any benefit, Biogen forged ahead with Aduhelm's FDA application.
The Alzheimer's Association is very supportive of approval at this point, based on the available science that we saw leading up to the approval process, and that has continued to be published, not just in this drug, but in the total class of drugs that we are seeing.
I didn't think there was very convincing evidence that the drug worked. In addition to that, you have to take into account the fact that the effect size that was observed, even in that one arm of the one trial, was an extremely small effect size.
Harvard University's Dr. Aaron Kesselheim sat on an FDA advisory committee that overwhelmingly voted against approving Aduhelm.
And then when you take into account also the fact that the drug was associated with brain swelling and bleeding in about a third of patients, even though, in many of those patients it was well managed, to me it didn't seem like the very, inconclusive, conflicting evidence of benefits outweighed the substantial, risks.
But instead of following the committee's advice, the FDA used a special method known as an accelerated approval for Aduhelm. The FDA approved the drug on its track record of removing amyloid from the brain rather than slowing dementia.
Often we see drugs get approved in this accelerated approval pathway for diseases like cancer. Usually it's on pretty well understood mechanisms. So if you can shrink a tumor, that's expected that over time that will result in improvements in overall survival. So it was controversial, and it was kind of like the FDA saying, we believe in the amyloid hypothesis, even though the neuroscience community is still in disagreement about it.
During the advisory committee meeting, the FDA had explicitly said that they weren't considering approving this drug merely on the basis of its effect on amyloid plaque alone. And so then when the FDA approved the drug in June, and it approved the drug on the basis of the effect of amyloid plaque alone, it was, sort of going back on what it had said 6 months before.
Well, accelerated approval is a well-established pathway by the US FDA. So there is nothing new or revolutionary here. We are able to gradually decrease this plaque burden that is affecting the neurons and causing Alzheimer's disease. I think this is significant.
Kesselheim and 2 other members resigned from the FDA's committee shortly after.
I stand ready to try to help the FDA understand the decision-making process in this case and, what went wrong with it. But I do think that it does require some additional investigation to try to figure out what went on here.
Now that we have seen the path, that we have one approved treatment and potentially others on the horizon, we need to make sure that those who could benefit from it have access to it.
The FDA's approval sent shares of the company up over 60% from the first day of trading in 2021. Wall Street expected Biogen's new drug to rake in billions of dollars every year. Of the estimated 6 million patients in the US, up to 2 million of them would be early enough in the disease to take Aduhelm. Except just 120 clinics are now administering Aduhelm, far from the 900 Biogen hoped to have up and running.
So when this drug was approved, there was an expectation that, thousands of Alzheimer's patients would be lining up to get it. And as we've seen Biogen report its initial results, it's really turned out to be a lot fewer than that.
Aduhelm only made $300,000 during Biogen's third quarter. That was far from the roughly $10 million Wall Street was expecting.
So after the approval, a lot of eyebrows were raised both by the process itself and by the price. And at least one congressional investigation has been opened by Representatives Carolyn Maloney and Frank Pallone, essentially into both of those issues.
According to a report from Stat News, Biogen executives held a close relationship with FDA officials to help revive Aduhelm after it failed its late-stage trial. When asked for comment, Biogen said the FDA asked the company to participate in an exceptionally thorough collaborative workstream process to understand its trial data.
A lot of that focused on a meeting that a senior Biogen executive had with the head of the neurology drug division at the FDA. They met at a scientific conference and really just sort of talked potentially about whether this drug had a future.
Meetings between the FDA and companies are, is normal and is very important for, to be able to exchange ideas and thoughts about the, process of drug development to try to make it more efficient. But, I think it's also very important that when those meetings happen, that there's transparency around them and that, there's, full disclosure about the existence of those meetings.
The fact is this is a historic moment, and we seem to be getting lost in some of the details around the approval process.
Shortly after the report, interim FDA Commissioner Dr. Janet Woodcock requested an independent investigation into her own agency. The FDA told CNBC they were not in a position to comment given the investigation. However, the Office of the Inspector General reiterated they are committed to overseeing the integrity of FDA's drug approval process. Biogen's initial decision to price a year's worth of Aduhelm infusions at about $56,000 per year sparked criticism.
That was, by some estimates, 10 times higher than what a lot of folks expected.
And on top of that will be infusion costs, because it is a monthly infusion, as well as monitoring costs, such as the serial MRIs that need to be done.
However, with sales lagging, Biogen said it would slash Aduhelm's list price by roughly 50% at the start of 2022.
If we knew this was going to work, I'd take a second mortgage on the house. I mean, to stop the loss of memory would be worth whatever.
Meanwhile, major insurers like Medicare are still debating whether to reimburse seniors for amyloid-targeting antibodies like Aduhelm. Under the drug's previous price, the agency running Medicare warned that Part B premiums were set to rise in 2022 by about 15% because of the Alzheimer's treatment.
Medicare, of course, is the government payer that covers the elderly, and so a lot of Alzheimer's patients will be influenced by this coverage decision. That is expected early next year and could be extremely influential.
And of course, with that comes a question of not just coverage for the medication, but coverage for the infusion, coverage for the required monitoring.
As part of Aduhelm's approval, Biogen has to show through an additional study that removing amyloid actually slows patients' dementia.
Initially, when they got the approval, Biogen CEO Michel Vounatsis joined us on CNBC, and he said they had up to 9 years to show that confirmatory result.
We will be in a position to generate real-world evidence data that hopefully will substantiate the mechanism of action.
After that, it was reported the FDA was not happy with how long they said that they could potentially take on it.
We agree that 9 years is too long to wait for answers related to this confirmatory trial.
Biogen has since cut its timeline for the trial, which is set to enroll 1,300 people, from 9 years to 4 once it kicks off in early 2022. Executives remain confident in Aduhelm's long-term potential. Biogen is trying to rapidly onboard more infusion centers and improve amyloid testing by covering the costs for patients. The company believes it can recruit 50,000 new patients with Aduhelm's newly lowered price. But the drug's delayed uptake has been damaging to Biogen, which is now expecting to cut costs by about $500 million in 2022. The company has another promising Alzheimer's treatment known as lecanemab currently in late-stage testing, but its clock is ticking. Competitor Eli Lilly filed its amyloid-targeting treatment donanemab with the FDA in October and hopes for an approval as early as 2022.
It is exciting to potentially have not just the first treatment, but the second and the third and the fourth in the pipeline.
The vast majority of the patients who have asked me about aducanumab or Aduhelm have listened very thoughtfully to the answers I provide them. So a lot of them are hopeful that this will be the start of the new era in therapy of Alzheimer's disease, and in the near future, we will actually have effective and safe and affordable and accessible medications.
In terms of this new drug, we are keeping an open mind. If only there were a way of being more certain in our minds that it works.
But I don't want to jump into it. I don't want to make a mistake. We're all going to die. But for someone who knows that they are going to die sooner than they'd like to, it makes everything just very different. I can remember moments of thinking, that was so wonderful. I hope I get a lot more of those wonderful moments. I feel as if I am living, have lived, and want to continue to live best I can.